Carl Jung once wrote about a psychological transformation so disturbing it changed the way he saw human nature. It wasn't a transformation of rage. It wasn't an explosion of violence. It was something far quieter and far more unsettling. It was silence. The silence of the empath. That eerie stillness the moment they stop absorbing lies, stop apologizing for their existence, and start wielding truth like a blade. For decades, Jung sat across from men and women who appeared fragile, broken, even harmless. They were dismissed as too sensitive, too emotional, too weak to survive the brutality of life. Society called them victims. Jung thought so too, at first. But the deeper he looked, the more disturbed he became. These people were not weak, they were hiding something. Their endless sensitivity, their unbearable pain, their silence was not weakness, it was potential. A weapon waiting to be uncovered. And Jung realized something else. Something that unsettled him more than any dream or patient he had ever analyzed. When these empaths reached their breaking point, they didn't collapse. They awakened. This wasn't just a change of mood, it was a metamorphosis. The very qualities that once made them seem vulnerable, their ability to feel deeply, to notice every subtle shift in tone, every hidden pattern in behavior, became their strength. And in that moment of awakening, they stopped being victims of psychology and became its masters. In this video, we are going to uncover that hidden power of empaths, the transformation Jung documented in his private notes, the one that terrified him and could change the way you see yourself forever. The empath begins life cast into a role they never chose, the role of the victim. They become the emotional shock absorbers of their families, their relationships, their entire social systems. When a parent rages in drunken fury, it is the empath who absorbs the chaos. When a partner betrays with a smile and a lie, it is the empath who quietly swallows the pain. When a so-called friend manipulates under the mask of kindness, it is the empath who carries the burden in silence. They learn early on that their feelings are too much. Society teaches them that noticing the lies, the cracks in the mask, the tension under the laughter makes them the problem. And so they apologize for seeing too much, for feeling too deeply, for existing at all. Years turn into decades, and the pattern repeats. The empath bends until they nearly break. They absorb every storm until their bodies ache with invisible bruises. And when they finally collapse under the weight of it all, what do? They blame themselves. One man admitted, "At 56, I'm only now realizing I've been gaslit my entire life." Another wrote, "I am 71 and only recently learned to defend myself. Better late than never." This is the tragedy of the empath. They are not weak, but they are conditioned to believe they are. They are not powerless, but they are taught to bury their greatest strength, their sensitivity, in order to be accepted. They are like a blade kept in a sheath too long, corroding under neglect, mistaken for uselessness. All the while, their true nature waits. And Jung discovered when the day comes that they finally stop apologizing and start listening to themselves, that blade does not stay hidden. And then, it happens. The moment Jung described as one of the most disturbing patterns he ever witnessed. The breaking point. It doesn't creep in slowly. It doesn't give a warning. It strikes like lightning, sudden, violent, undeniable. And almost always, the trigger is betrayal. Not just any betrayal, but betrayal by the very person the empath trusted the most. A spouse whose eyes promised loyalty but hid another life. A parent who claimed love while poisoning their child with manipulation. A friend who smiled to your face while sharpening knives behind your back. The empath absorbs so much, lie after lie, cut after cut, until the betrayal becomes too obvious, too undeniable, too humiliating to ignore. But here is what shook Jung. It wasn't the act of betrayal itself that shattered the empath. It was the realization that they had always seen it. The signs were there, the late-night absences, the sudden mood shifts, the words that didn't quite match the actions. The empath felt it all. They noticed it all, but they silenced themselves. They doubted themselves. They convinced themselves that they were paranoid, dramatic, too sensitive. Until reality slams down like a hammer and there is no longer anywhere to hide. Jung called this moment the clarity event. Most people would expect an explosion. Tears, screams, rage. That's what abusers prepare for. An emotional storm they can dismiss as madness. But that isn't what happens. What Jung witnessed again and again was far more terrifying. The empath becomes still, unnaturally calm. The storm doesn't come from outside, it shifts inward. Their breathing slows, their eyes sharpen. And in that silence, something once buried begins to rise. The empath's emotional intelligence, once suppressed, mocked, and doubted, fuses with their hidden analytical precision. The thousands of observations they've collected, the countless small details others ignored, come rushing together like pieces of a puzzle, finally locking into place. This is the moment when the victim dissolves, and something else is born. Jung saw it with horror and awe, the shadow integration. The exact second when the empath stops doubting their perceptions and begins trusting them absolutely. From that moment on, the game changes forever. The clarity event is not the end, it is the ignition. In that silence, the empath does not collapse, they transform. They are no longer the sponge that absorbs everyone else's chaos. They are no longer the emotional dumping ground for broken families, cheating lovers, or manipulative friends. They become something far more dangerous. They become a mirror. And when people look into that mirror, they see themselves, their lies, their hidden motives, their shame, reflected back with brutal clarity. Jung discovered something chilling. Empaths don't forget. For years, they've been cataloging every betrayal, every inconsistency, every whispered lie. They've mapped human behavior with an accuracy most psychologists only dream of. And when the transformation arrives, that knowledge, once dormant, becomes weaponized. But here's the truth. This is not rage. This is not revenge. This is not some outburst of fury that burns out in minutes. It is precision. The empath begins to speak truth, calmly, directly, surgically. They reveal what they've seen, what they've endured, what they've cataloged in silence for years. Not with cruelty, but with clinical exactness. Like a surgeon who points to each diseased organ before removing it, the awakened empath cuts through illusions without raising their voice. And here lies the terror. Because no one can fight against the truth spoken with calm authority. Abusers are prepared for tears, for rage, for chaos. They are defenseless against clarity. One line captures this transformation perfectly. If it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth. This is the mantra of the awakened empath. In that moment, they realize They are not victims. They never were. Sensitivity was never weakness. It was data. It was awareness. It was power waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. The empath's shadow, the anger they buried, the instincts they silenced, the strength they denied, is no longer hidden. It fuses with their light, and what emerges is not the same person who once apologized for existing. What emerges is someone whole, integrated, untouchable. A being society cannot gaslight. A person manipulators cannot deceive. A soul that no longer doubts what it sees. This is the transformation Jung both admired and feared, the day the empath becomes complete. So what happens after the transformation? What becomes of the empath once they are no longer the silent victim, but the integrated self? Jung's private notes reveal something chilling. Manipulators sensed it before anyone else. Like predators who instinctively avoid fire, toxic people began to avoid these transformed empaths. Why? Because their usual weapons, guilt, lies, gaslighting, no longer worked. The awakened empath saw the moves before they were even played. They recognized manipulation not in hindsight but in real time, sometimes before a single word was even spoken. Jung described it as the predator's instinct reversed. Normally, predators sense weakness. But with the integrated empath, it was the predators who felt exposed. They felt naked in their presence, as if their camouflage had been ripped away. One viewer captured this perfectly. People often think I'm stupid, but I see everything and never forget. That is the hidden power, silent observation turned into unstoppable clarity. And here's the terrifying part. It wasn't just intuition, it was precision. These awakened empaths had collected years, sometimes decades of human data. Every expression, every hesitation, every contradiction, stored, remembered, analyzed. When the transformation came, they didn't just feel truth, they knew it. With accuracy that made even Jung uneasy. He tested them, introduced strangers without context. Within minutes, they could identify insecurities, traumas, even hidden addictions, and their accuracy rate was staggering. These were not psychics. They were not prophets. They were simply paying attention at a level most humans cannot imagine. That's why Jung feared them, because this was not just healing. It was evolution. They no longer wasted energy on toxic people. They built boundaries that were ironclad. They became what Jung called selectively empathetic. Still kind, but no longer naive. Their compassion was no longer a bleeding wound. It was a sharpened blade, given only to those who deserved it. Imagine the difference. Before, the empath loved everyone, even those who drained them, used them, broke them. After transformation, they still loved deeply, but strategically, with precision, with choice, and that is what made them untouchable. Jung admitted this was the most disturbing transformation he had ever documented, not because it created monsters, but because it created individuals who could no longer be deceived, dominated, or destroyed. They had become, in his words, psychologically complete, and in that completeness they became something society was not ready for. A mirror so clear that predators could no longer hide. The empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness. It is from unconscious suffering to conscious strength. For years they were told their feelings were wrong, that their awareness was paranoia, that their intuition was weakness. But when they stop doubting themselves, when they integrate the shadow they were taught to hide, everything changes. And here's the truth Jung uncovered. It is never too late. One man confessed, "I am 71 and only recently learned to defend myself. Better late than never." Another admitted, "At 56, I realized I'd been gaslit my entire life." This is proof that transformation does not belong to the young. It belongs to the willing. The moment you choose clarity over illusion, boundaries over people-pleasing, self-trust over self-doubt, that is the moment you awaken. The awakened empath does not become cruel. They do not lose their heart. They gain a backbone. They learn to love with strength instead of weakness. They become what Jung called psychologically complete, a human being who can feel everything without being destroyed by it, and see everything without becoming cynical. And so I leave you with this. If you've reached the point where you no longer doubt your perceptions, declare it. Write in the comments, "I no longer doubt what I see." If you are ready to stop dimming your light for the comfort of others, write, "I choose conscious transformation." Because your sensitivity is not a curse, it is your evolution. And the day you choose to wield it consciously is the day you stop being a victim and become a force of nature. That is the hidden power of the empath, the power Jung feared, and the power the world needs now more than ever.